Hey everyone! Today I'm sharing another part of my Inktober drawing process. This time the prompt was trunk, a word with a lot of different meanings, which made it especially fun to interpret. Let me tell you a bit about the tools and materials I used. For this illustration, I worked with my old watercolors, a few brushes from AliExpress, and black markers. The markers are from a brand called Black Marker. I also used a sketchbook with thick paper, not watercolor paper, but sturdy enough to handle water, paint and ink without warping. Now let me tell you a bit about the illustration itself and how it came to be. Since the challenge themes are chosen by the organizer, it's not always easy to find the right association or idea. When that happens, I try not to overthink it. I just let my subconscious take over and go with whatever imagery comes to mind. My first and strongest association with this prompt was a tree. The very first image that came to mind was a large tree cross-section, and I was lucky that this idea worked perfectly with the technique I chose. I started by sketching the basic outlines of the future drawing in pencil. Then I added the first background layer using watercolor. To make sure the paint spreads nicely and creates smooth gradients, I always dampen the paper first. I use a large brush with clean water, and while the surface is still wet, I begin applying the watercolor layer. Up close, you can see that the paper is still wet, with a thin transparent layer of water on the surface. You can also notice how the watercolor pigment mixes with the water, forming interesting streaks and smooth color transitions. In contrast, on the dry parts of the paper, the paint behaves differently, leaving sharp, well-defined edges. After the watercolor has completely dried, which usually takes around 40 minutes to an hour, I move on to drawing the main details with a marker. I start by outlining the outer contour of the tree bark, marking its thickness, and then filling it in with a black marker. This section becomes the main graphic element of the piece and serves as the compositional center of the illustration. I really like using stylization in my illustrations, so my drawings tend to be more simplified and not overly detailed. I focus on large black shapes, aiming for strong contrast and clean minimal composition rather than intricate details. One thing I quickly learned while working with this technique is that a marker behaves very differently on top of watercolor than it does on plain paper. Drawing lines becomes more difficult because the surface has more grip, making the pen move less smoothly. It's also worth noting that I use thicker, more textured paper meant for watercolor, not the smooth kind usually used for marker art. After the watercolor dries, the surface becomes even rougher, so the marker catches on the texture and the lines turn out less even and a bit rougher. I've also noticed that markers get used up much faster with this technique. During just 1 month of the Inktober challenge, I went through 2 of my favorite thick markers for filling large black areas, even though the same type had previously lasted me almost a year. I also realized that this kind of paper requires markers with a thicker tip. For this drawing, for example, I'm using a 0.4 liner instead of my usual 0.2. On this textured surface, a 0.2 liner barely shows up at all because the paper absorbs most of the pigment. Once I finish drawing the thick bark, I move on to the tree rings. Here, I work almost entirely without a pencil guide, letting the lines flow naturally and follow the texture of the paper. In a drawing like this, where the goal is to show the wood's texture, the roughness of the marker lines actually works really well. The uneven strokes add character, and the contrast looks great. After the background layer dried and I had painted more than half of the tree cross-section, I noticed that the watercolor had lightened significantly. The paint could have been applied more densely, the marker covered most of it, leaving the background barely visible. It did add a bit of texture and depth, but overall, I think the watercolor layer turned out too light. Now I just need to finish the last section of the tree cross-section, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out. The bark has great contrast, and the rings look lively and dynamic. I really like the overall effect. The tree cross-section is now complete, and all that's left are a few small details. I'm starting to paint the forest and trees. As you can see, my pine trees are quite sketchy and simplified, but I hope they still look recognizable. After finishing the forest, I move on to the urban part of the illustration. This section is much simpler, just concrete blocks with small windows. I think anyone who's ever lived in a city will instantly recognize that familiar atmosphere, a sense of crowding, and a bit of quiet melancholy. At first, I planned to make the houses completely black, to make the windows stand out more, but then I realized that would shift the focus of the composition and change the overall mood of the piece. So, I decided to leave the buildings more minimal and sketch-like, letting them quietly blend into the background without overpowering the rest of the scene. I added the final touches: antennas, satellite dishes, and a bit of undergrowth around the base. Then I went over the entire illustration once more, refining small details and adding a little extra depth to the houses. And that's it, the drawing is complete. I hope you enjoyed watching the process.